Thank you for joining us on Health Diary. My name is Gladys Gashanja and we're coming to you from the Westwood Hotel here in Nairobi. Now, did you know that caring for someone too much could actually hurt you? Yup. Taking care of somebody without really being aware of your emotional health, and we're talking about your loved ones who are not well or any other person who cannot take care of themselves, can actually lead to something we call compassion fatigue. The realities of compassion fatigue coming your way, starting with this fact of a matter. Compassion fatigue, also known as secondary traumatic stress (STS), is a preoccupation with absorbing trauma and emotional stresses of others, and this creates a secondary traumatic stress in the helper. Though common among workers who work directly with victims of disasters, trauma, or illness, especially in the healthcare industry, it can also affect family members taking care of a loved one. When caregivers focus on others without practicing self-care, this can lead to depression, isolation, apathy, substance abuse, among other self-destructive behaviors. While the effects of compassion fatigue can cause pain and suffering, learning to recognize and manage its symptoms is the first step towards healing.
I've been a caregiver for 3 years. My mom got a stroke towards the end of January 2017. It was the last Saturday of January. She had actually just been in Nairobi. She had visited me on her way from the US and then gone to Kakamega, and then she got the stroke. And so that's where the journey began. About 3 months after she came to live with me, I resigned from my workplace. And I would say that was a big transition. And it shifted me from just simply financing her care to actually engaging in her care. Despite having paid nurses, it did not exempt me from all the emotion and the responsibility that comes with being a family caregiver. I think the first thing I dealt with was anxiety, the anxiety of my mother could go any minute. It took a long time for me to be comfortable to be out of the house for even half a day. I would be so scared. And unless you process that, you can unconsciously also begin to feel resentful. Resentful towards the person you're caring for, resentful towards God, resentful even towards yourself. Then my mom was also processing. She was processing her loss of independence. I had shifted to the role of the caregiver, and it was such an intense role that I would forget to be just her daughter. At that point, I thought, I'm alone and I'm stressed and this is overwhelming. And yet I was really enjoying the blessing of being with my mom. At some point, I got into a serious negotiations and arguments with God. Are you punishing me? What is it? What have I done wrong? Everybody who called, save for a few, they were only interested in my mom because she was the sick person. I was well. Compassion fatigue takes a long time to recover from. Be patient with yourself.
So how exactly does taking care of somebody hurt you? Let's find out. And to help us do so, we have Rosa Sananu, who is a counseling psychologist. Thank you for your time. And we have David Wanjala, who is a caregiver to a wife who actually went through a miscarriage. Thank you for joining us. Now, I'll start with you, Rosa. It kind of sounds like an emotional burnout. Is it?
Yes, it is, because the basic definition of compassion fatigue is being preoccupied with the stress of other people. So it is also referred to as a secondary traumatic stress, where you find that the caregiver has accumulated the stress and the emotional trauma of the person that they're giving care to. So in essence, the fact that they're taking care of a vulnerable person ends up hurting them or overwhelming them if not taken care of.
Somebody might be wondering, what's the difference between compassion fatigue and burnout as we know it?
Yes. So for burnout, we majorly look at the physical. This person experiences physical exhaustion, and the major difference with compassion fatigue is that with compassion fatigue, the person goes through emotional exhaustion and a dread of taking care of this person, and the fact that caregiving begins to lose meaning. So for burnout, it can happen also for any, let me say, career, because it's just majorly an accumulation of fatigue. But with compassion fatigue, this is most common for people who are caregiving or giving care to people who are emotionally vulnerable or traumatized. So we are talking about journalists, nurses, pastors, social workers, counselors, and informal caregivers now, people who take care of their relatives who are unwell.
Yeah. And David is one of them. You took care of your wife. At what point, going by what Rosa is describing, did you realize that you were suffering from compassion fatigue?
Actually, it hadn't hit me that I'm actually a sufferer of the same until you talked about it. And when I did a research on the same, and I realized, oh my, this is something that has hit me hard because of the irritability I had, because of the exhaustion I had. You know, like, I'm not a heavy sleeper, but I would end up sleeping for even 9-10 straight hours. I used to have a normal blood pressure. I remember the last time I was diagnosed as hypertensive, 158/138, and that's too high. Actually, I remember the doctor asking me, how did I get to the hospital? Because I'm supposed to be actually on a wheelchair or something like that. So really, there are some predisposing issues that came up as a result of the same. And I unknowingly was a patient without actually seeking a remedy for the same.
Does it set on immediately, or is it something that you grow into with time depending on the exposure to the person you're taking care of?
It comes gradually, but the key to note is when someone is not taking care of themselves, because one may get the compassion fatigue, but they are aware and they are able to, before they get to that level of being overwhelmed, they are able to get their triggers and their signs. So compassion fatigue really depends on the exposure, depends on the kind of caregiving that this person is giving, because for some, they are not as exposed as others, and also the level of self-care or the level of care that this person is giving to themselves, not to the other person.
What are the symptoms we're talking about?
There is a feeling of just being purely tired. Even after getting, say, rest or sleeping or relaxing, you still feel very exhausted. Irritability, anxiety. So if I am taking care of a patient, I actually dread taking care of them, but I still feel guilty for not taking care of them. And then over time, the caregiving begins to lose meaning. So you're doing it, but it doesn't give you satisfaction. It actually just gives you a lot of dread. Trouble sleeping is another symptom. And isolation, you find that the caregiver tends to isolate themselves from hobbies, from social and personal relationships that gave them meaning. So this person becomes very isolated. Depression is also another symptom of compassion fatigue. And then over time, this person also loses meaning in their own work. Any other work other than caregiving, you find that this person begins to lose meaning in it.
Yes. Okay, so David, you were catering for a wife that had undergone a miscarriage. She not only underwent that, but you were also part and parcel of that experience. How did you relate the two in as far as how you were feeling now after the fact?
First thing, when the baby is diagnosed as dead in the stomach, the first thing you start looking for is how to be cleaned. Now, that has some, 1, psychological impact, 2, it has some economic impact. Then thinking that even after doing this, you will not have a live kid, that also hits on you. But then again, your wife has to be alive. She has to live. And you need to go all the way for her. So because you're taking care of her, she feels loved, she feels cared for, she heals faster. But you remain with a trauma that, if not careful, it's going to affect the way you relate with everyone after that. It affected my productivity at work. It affected the way I worked with my workmates, the way I related with them. It affected me so much such that people would wonder what is wrong with this gentleman. Usually I'm a sanguine, I'm bubbly, I like talking to people, I love laughing. I can tell you for a fact, for quite some times, I've not been able to joke and laugh the way I've always done.
What should, in the case of David and many others that are taking care of other people, be aware of so that you stop it before it gets to that point?
One of the things to be aware of is of your own limitation as a human being. Because you see, when our loved ones get into positions or situations that they are most vulnerable, because we love them, we feel that we need to sort and fix it out. Number two is to be aware of your triggers, because there are other predisposing factors like personality and previous experiences, and even the caregiver, have they been a victim of trauma before? So be aware of your triggers. The other thing to be aware of is that self-care is not selfish. That self-care does not mean that you do not love your loved one. Self-care does not mean that it is neglecting your person, the person that you're giving care to. So that self-care is not a luxury but a necessity. So once you're aware of that, you will prioritize yourself, because you know that you cannot pour from an empty cup. Find time to actually take care of your hobbies, the leisure activities, something that it piques your interest and something that rejuvenates you. For some people, it could be yoga. For some people, it could be praying. It could be exercise. But ensure that you're filling in your emotional cup. Be very alert to keep your social connection. Call up a friend. You can even ask a friend to call you at the same time every day or every week, just to keep checking on you and how you're doing emotionally. You have to realize that there are people who would offer help if only you asked and if only you allowed them to.
Okay, and David, a lot of what she's saying has a lot to do with even accepting that it's happening in the first place. Yeah. Some of it I'm sure you are aware of. But at what point did the male ego check in for, I've got this?
I couldn't cry before my wife, to tell you the truth. But there are many times I would wake up at 5 to prepare to go to work and cry in the sitting room, because I felt I'm falling apart. But then I can't remember the last time I sat down and talked to my friends about my issues. Not until now I met still a mom and I realized my wife is talking to people. I have to create my own group to talk to. But most men do not want to talk about it. It has made me into an introvert that I have never been ever since I grew up.
Rosa, are there people that are affected by compassion fatigue more than others? And I'm talking about the gender here. More male or more female?
I would say coping mechanisms is what would make others more vulnerable to the effects compared to others. Like he was saying, you may find that the female gender tend to either talk about it more, or they are open to seeking help. Cases like dementia, Alzheimer's, they tend to go for longer. So when you're coming with a logical mindset to want to fix it, especially for the male gender, you find that they may be more predisposed to the effects of compassion fatigue.
David, I don't know, in your situation, trying to maneuver the season, did you find yourself in some of these negative places?
Instead of being the sanguine that I was forced to think differently about things in life, and I became calculative and sensitive about everything. To tell you the truth, even now, how you relate with your wife kind of changes, because you're afraid if she becomes pregnant again, will this happen? So it also impacts on your sex life. It's a fact of life. Yes, I became very negative in the way I looked at life and pregnancy and all that. But one thing that helped me is when I sat down, I wrote in my phone, I wrote every feeling I had. I pray to God my wife never reads it. I pray to God nobody ever reads it, because I used it to vent out the frustrations I had. But it really affected my personality.
You may find that there are those who may get into overworking themselves. So they may whatever they do, they're overdoing it. So if it is work, they use that as a distraction to not confront the emotional overwhelm that they are going through. So some of them may be into different types of addiction, either sex addiction, work that I have mentioned, substance abuse, and there are some that may isolate themselves. Isolation is also a form of destructive behavior, because if it is work, they'll not show up to work, or they will not be productive in the work that they do. Others may indulge into a lot of religiosity, so that even whatever is meant to work for your wellness, like religion and the spiritual exercises, they will overdo it to keep themselves from confronting the pain and the fatigue emotionally that they are facing, because compassion fatigue comes with a sense of loss. You see, I have lost control over something. I cannot control this situation my loved one is in. They need to go through the anger that I cannot control this. Sometimes you're angry at the person you're taking care of. You feel that, why did you get sick? Why did this happen to you? So someone needs to go through these feelings. Otherwise, when they get to an overwhelm, the only thing you will do now is self-destruct.
A big part of that sounds like therapy is key. Apart from talking to your peers, other men, did you find some sort of relief?
I ought to have gone through a therapy. I ought to. But I think it's the attitude I have towards therapists sometimes is a problem. Because you see, if you don't have a wife who has gone through a miscarriage, what authority do you have to sit down and tell me about the same thing? If you haven't really been through what I've been through, what gives you the moral authority to tell me or speak to me about the same issue? My wife went to church and she was helped, but I felt these people are not an authority on me, because they've not gone through what I've gone through. I went to Stella Mom, very good people. But now, where are the men? What is the role of the father, the husband in it? It's not making sense to me. Sometimes my wife would speak to me and I would respond in a tone only she realizes it's not the correct tone. And I would tell God, now, what am I doing?
And one of the things that we help demystify counseling is we ask, if you were to walk into a hospital, for example, say you have a headache or you have a stomach upset, you wouldn't want to ask, I want the doctor who's had a stomach upset lately so that they can treat me,
Fair enough.
like you felt what I have felt. You will ask, I want a qualified licensed person, because there are laymen who've gone through stomach upset and they will give you some concoctions that will make you worse. So even for counseling, what we say is find a licensed professional therapist who has actually gone to school to identify your emotional, your psychological behaviors that are linked to destructiveness and some of the coping mechanisms that will work for wellness. So the place of therapy is to help someone process, talk about it, and also sometimes deal with other underlying issues that could be making the compassion fatigue more compounded in this individual. Because like I said, if you take an example of an individual who's been a victim of trauma themselves, they may be working through their trauma by caregiving.
What would be your message to fellow men out there?
First thing every man should do is seek for help. Because you hear people killing their wives in the house. You hear people killing themselves in the house. Policemen shooting themselves and shooting their families. Men knifing their wives and knifing themselves or hanging themselves. It is because of such kind of things that are happening in their lives. Men can also be talked to. They can also be helped to process their grief, to process their fatigue, to process their emotions, because we are very poor in emotional process. We're very poor.
Yes.
And we take it on our employer, we take it on our colleagues, we take it on our friends, and sometimes we hit the bottle.
Is this something that is recognized by the health system as something that has to do with mental health?
It is still something that is coming up. It was mostly known for the nurses and the medics, but now I believe that other professions are embracing it, and even in the mental health sector, that it's a conversation we are beginning to have about the different sectors that are more prone to compassion fatigue, so that we can address it as mental health professionals. And even for the counselors just versing ourselves with the various categories so that we are able to even pick it as something to deal with in our sessions.
What measures should be put in place to support those that are dealing with compassion fatigue, especially in the workplace?
Talk to your people. Have employer assistance programs that talk about mental health specifically. Having an in-house therapist or a mechanism of referral to therapists as a workplace policy, so that even at the workplace, therapy is demystified. It is not seen as someone is about to lose their job because they are suddenly going crazy. Because you see, sometimes in the workplace, people may tend to associate mental health or seeking therapy as being crazy. So we start assuming you are underperforming. And because of that environment we create for you, you feel that I cannot do this because I still need to keep the status that my workmates look at me with. So if we demystify that as employers and put some workplace policies in place, do the trainings, help employees in self-awareness, talk about what they're going through, and even just putting therapy as something that they can go for, like the coffee breaks, you know, and the team buildings that you go for. And therapy is so accessible, even in the insurance programs that workplaces offer. I believe that is it is key, and it will push us a step further in dealing with such matters.
Very well said. Rosa Sanao, counseling psychologist. David Wanjala, thank you so much for your time and demystifying what compassion fatigue. It is real and it affects all of us one way or another. And as Rosa said, self-awareness is the key. Time now for the health tip.
Health tip brought to you by Good Life Pharmacy.
On the upper extremities, we will start with the elbow support. This one is mainly for what we call tennis and golf elbows. The wrist straps again can be used for edema. Edema is basically swelling or pain. It compresses it down. Ankle support. It has a strap for individualized fixation. The light fixations, this is also an ankle support for very mild pain. We also have the knee support, which is mainly for the post-operative care. Abdominal belts, which are mainly used for abdominal post-surgery care. They are also used as a tummy trimmer. The sacrolumbar, this is for the back care, and the spine injuries, spine issues. You can get all these supports in any of our Good Life outlets. We are all about you.
Health tip brought to you by Good Life Pharmacy.
Mental health is such a crucial conversation to keep on having, and that's why compassion fatigue had to be heard today on Health Diary. Thank you for your suggestions coming through to us on our social media handles. My name is Gladys Gashanja, and we've been coming to you from the Westwood Hotel here in Nairobi. Until next time, take care. So I finish at that point and start again. I'm sorry, Kyoko, forgive me. Hi, Sawa. Really? So why did we stop? It's nature. Hi, Abasi. Let's go. Until next time, take care.
Kill it. Kill it.
Sawa.